Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time we get to gather together. I just pray that you will continue to be with us as we go through these studies, Lord, that you would continue to help us to understand these truths, that you would be with Sister Elaine as she continues and concludes her study, Lord, that you would impress upon us the very things we need to hear, and that we would come away with a greater understanding on these histories, Lord. And I just thank you for being with us, and may your heavenly angels surround us, and may you press back foe of the enemy. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.
So on the break, I was reading something. Does everybody remember what we were talking? I was mentioning last night that I got from somebody else as well. With the Spanish flu, it came in waves, right? And as an article, the middle of the U.S. braces for an onslaught of virus moves beyond the coast. A second wave of coronavirus cases is charting a path from the coastal Washington state, California, New York, and New Jersey, and threatening population centers in America's middle. Emerging hotspots include smaller communities, and then it goes on to list. Just thought it was interesting. It's referring to it as a second wave.
So did he send you that line too, right, with the waves?
Yeah.
The waves were 2019 is a wave, 2021 is a wave, and then Sunday Law is another wave.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think it ended at the line that he sent, I think, ended it at Sunday Law.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Line who sent?
One of the brothers in Africa.
And I was watching Fauci on an interview yesterday, and he was saying that we can expect more waves of this, and how it's going to work is it's going to be every winter, because the cycle of the path that it's on is now we're entering into our summer, so it's going to die down here, but the southern coasts now they're already like in South Africa cases, so they're entering into their winter. But when they exit their winter, we enter into our winter again, so it's going to come back up here and swing around again.
Yeah,
so
he was saying that it was cyclical, that it would, yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that I forgot about that in the Spanish flu documentary that went around, that it came in waves, and that then I saw after that Dr. Fauci was talking about the very same thing, waves, and here's an article it's talking about a wave. But I don't know if it's talking about the same wave, so to speak. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
And I see it as waves like when the plagues were falling on Egypt, they were waves coming through trying to get the people to give up their false gods and to come to the true God.
So what do you think will happen? You know, Trump is talking about in April to have everything back to normal, and the people that are following him are all concerned about the economy more than they are about the well-being of other people. So there's two sides of information that are saying what's going to happen, you know, or measuring the statistics, basically saying what is actually happening. One side is saying that it's not as bad as the other side is saying it is. So if there's waves in this thing, does that mean there's potential in April for this thing to seemingly die off, and these people will get behind Trump even more?
That's what I had thought, because they're just going to think that he knows what he's doing, or however that plays out. And so the two sides are becoming, you know, when we talk about a settling into the truth so that you cannot be moved, it's like that's what this struggle is ongoing. It's pulling people to their camps to where they're going to be on one side or the other.
Exactly.
Really.
I already saw somebody from Romania send me a message. A Baptist pastor was requesting people to come back to Sunday worship because of this coronavirus. He said that God is upset with us. So this will definitely bring people to Sunday or something.
Right. So
the way they say back to God, you know.
Yep. So come to Sunday, and there's going to be that little group that says come to Sabbath. And go ahead.
Sister Susan has a question in the chat.
Go ahead, because I can't read the chat.
He says, will each wave be worse, do you think?
I thought it would be, because what happened in the plagues of Egypt? Didn't they each get worse? It hit different areas. Maybe that's something to study going forward, because it hit different areas. I don't mean areas geographically, but like, you know, it's going to hit their money. It's going to hit the different aspects of life, and it's, to me, what I kind of view it as, and maybe somebody else has a better idea of it, but it's like with Trump, for instance, it's shut down some of his own properties as well, and it's like there's a striving with him to humble his heart as he continues to lose more and more, and as he loses more and more, he just gets more and more defiant.
Mm-hmm. Just like Pharaoh.
Just like Pharaoh.
What were you guys saying about Sunday? You were saying there'd be this one group of Sunday, one group of Sabbath.
Well, that's what Sister Christina was talking about in Romania, that there's a call already to come back to Sabbath, that we're being punished and come back to church. And so there's going to be a small group of us and all those that join on, or who those that join on, that they're calling for the Sabbath.
It won't be to do, the Sabbath issue won't be agitated, is what Parminder is saying. It's the reason why we know that there's no Sunday law is because the issue isn't agitated at all, is what he said. So I'm wondering, I don't think that's something that we'll see far spread. It might be a small occurrence somewhere, but do you think?
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. I wasn't really meaning it as so literal as it sounded, so that was my bad. But it is a call back to God, and a call back to God, and we understand the issues are over equality and racism, sexism, and homosexuality, and allowing people those freedoms. So how it plays forward, how it plays out going forward, I don't know.
Well, that's what they're doing, though, because the evangelical mindset is God is punishing us, come back to church, and then infect everyone, and people who are weak and minorities always end up being the ones who suffer because they're not abiding by the shelter-in-place rule, which is to help people to stop spreading this.
Right.
Well, I think if they think the spreading of this virus is a punishment from God, then they're going to become even more firm in their position against people like homosexuals, and more firm in their stance on a man over a woman. And I mean, racism just seems to end up.
Because they already believe that those are issues. There's already reports of them blaming this virus on homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
That came out of, if anybody saw those articles.
I saw that, yeah.
The one that's leading the Bible studies in the White House.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Apparently made.
I was like, what?
Yeah. That they're saying that we're being punished because of homosexuals. So that's what we know, that's what that fight is about, is inequality, and they literally want, to them it's to get rid of all the, well, I guess in a way they're wanting to get rid of all the dross and the lower class, the poor, the uneducated, the homosexuals, and they're all the dross, and they want to see all the dross gone so that they can go on and continue on in their nationalistic state.
Well, then that would even mean the people who love everybody, like, doesn't matter about, people like that. So what do you mean against their ideology?
Parminder was saying that, the Seventh-day Adventist perspective is that when the Sunday law comes, what we do is we go into the city, to the city square, and we're fighting against the imposing of a Sunday law, a literal Sunday law, and we're there saying it's the Sabbath. But he said the reality is we go down to the city center, and these issues that we already see being agitated right now are going to the people are already aware of the mark of the beast. They're already aware of the third angel's message, and we go down and we're meant to support it because the laws are going to be coming through to oppress it. And he said, so if you don't see the issue of Sunday being agitated, which we don't, we already know that it's not going to have anything to do with that. And when we go down to these city centers, it's going to be about oppression, inequality, homophobia, and all these things. Yeah. So those are the things that we will be going down, like you were saying, Tony, that we will be in support of these things.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, because I was thinking, even if they enforce going back to church, that would be a form of force, whether you go on Saturday or Sunday. They just want people in churches. It wouldn't be a matter of days. And they wouldn't want homosexuals in churches because they'd be too prejudiced. They'd be like, get out of here, right? And so we wouldn't be going to those churches. We would be in different kind of groups. So therefore, we would be mixed in with all the so-called undesirables, right? I don't know. That's what I was thinking by listening to everything that you guys were talking, that Adventists are waiting for the literal Sunday law, but there wouldn't be one. And so therefore, they wouldn't think anything wrong with being requested to go back to church because they could still continue going to church. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I have something to input. I was thinking the Holocaust that happened, and that was Hitler in control of all of that, and that was prior to the world wars. I'm getting my history mixed up in my head, but when did the Holocaust occur?
During the World War II.
World War II, because it's interesting in that history that it wasn't just the Jews that were being persecuted in that massacre and all of that. It was also the homosexuals. It was also
And the gypsies. Yeah.
the gypsies. Yes. So it's really interesting. And I remember my dad saying that it wasn't so much. It was interesting in that part of the history, because when you're speaking about the homosexuals, it wasn't so much of the ones who were like less it was more of the ones that were more flamboyant.
I think it was the same idea of the purification of the race.
Right. Yeah. But it's really interesting that I wonder if that has some application to us in our time.
It should.
So, okay, quick
But what I want to say something, even though there's isolated cases where somebody's calling for some Sunday worship and stuff like that, we have to remember that the Levites don't know anything about equality. They're still in the church. They're still looking for Sunday law. And it is possible, like I wrote my cousin who sent me this, these probably are things to wake up the Levites.
I think it's a distraction, though. I've seen in some of the groups from Africa, these people keep posting like EWTN where they're calling for Sunday worship. And these people keep trying to push the fact that, see, it is a literal Sunday law, and it's not. I think it's a red herring for people in Adventism who are going down the wrong path. I don't know. It's just in my mind, it seems like a distraction to make them think that, oh yeah, it is the Sunday law, and it distracts them from the equality issue.
Well, they will have to learn a lot like we did, so.
Yeah.
One thing that's visible is that God is making it clear so that they will be able to see. Those that will see, will see. I was thinking about it during the night about how sheep and the goats. You've got sheep and goats, right? And they're either already sheep or they're already goats. But what did Jesus say about his sheep? His sheep hear his voice and they follow him. So they'll hear him. If they are his sheep, they're not goats. They may not be knowing all the things that we know. But if they're his sheep, they will hear his voice. And if they're goats, they're going to hear the voice of the other side. So let's try a review. Help me out if I need it. But we're looking at the Third Diadochi War, and now also then the World War I and the application. So the Third Diadochi War was a group of wars that was called the Diadochi, the War of the Successors, that took place from the death of Alexander until you get to the four generals. And the history of the closing of the Second Diadochi War was this war that was ongoing between Antigonus, the king of the north, and Eumenes, the king of the south, which brought us to the Battle of Gabini. And I think the Battle of Gabini was the end of the Second War, beginning of the Third. Is that correct? Maybe Adriana has that answer. Hello?
What was the question?
The Battle of Gabini was the end of the second and the beginning of the third, right in there. It ends the second Diadochi War, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So you have Antigonus goes against Eumenes, and he's supported by Python and Seleucus. He defeats Eumenes by in the Battle of Gabini, where they have the Eumenes as the silver shields, which is the elite of Alexander the Great's army, and they're on this salt plain and have this battle, and as the elephants come out, the elephants get sent out first, and the elephants causes stirring up of the dust that causes confusion and chaos. Antigonus sees this, takes an advantage of it, and sends back to go get the baggage train of all the silver shields. So the silver shields, all their stuff winds up in the hands of Antigonus. Antigonus then, or the silver shields want their stuff back, so they strike a deal with Antigonus and give up Eumenes to them. So Eumenes loses to Antigonus by Eumenes' own people from the inside giving him up. So then Antigonus then titles himself the master of Asia. He's becoming a dictator. He starts to, then even his allies start to see him as being a threat. Antigonus then kills Python. And then the three allies start to see him, Cassander, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy, start to see him as this threat, and they send him an ultimatum. And so then you have the Antigonus versus the three allies, and the battle is over spheres of influence, leading up to then the Battle of Gaza, which is where Antigonus wins the territory of Cold Syria, puts Demetrius, his son, there in charge. Demetrius thinks that he can go then fight Ptolemy. His generals tell him, don't fight Ptolemy, he's stronger than you, but he goes against what the generals say to go fight. He loses the battle. Antigonus then comes back and helps him. Then you have Ptolemy and Seleucus. Seleucus at this time, somebody want to say something? Okay, so Ptolemy and Seleucus are Seleucus at this time, I don't think was a general. He's on his way to becoming greater there, but this is where then you have, after the Battle of Gaza, Seleucus is rising because he's going back to try to get, he flees back to go try to get Babylon. And in this period of time, he winds up taking it, losing it, taking it, losing it. And then they come to all the way up to the borders of Egypt, and they have the Peace of the Dynasts here. This is where the Nabateans come in. I don't think we discussed them briefly. But then you're going to go into here the Babylonian Wars, and then the Seleucid Empire beginning here. So was that a fairly good summary, if I didn't mess that up?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
World War I, you have World War I, you have the King of the North and the King of the South, Russia being the King of the South, Germany and Austria-Hungary being the King of the North. You have these Slavic territories here that Serbia is ambitious and wanting to take up and make these Slavic territories, bring them all together to unite, to become one. Austria-Hungary goes and takes Bosnia, which is the Bosnian Crisis. Bosnia is a great economic source. Serbia sees that avenue dried up. They want to go and fight. Russia, though, who is backing Serbia, who's ally, however you want to put it, Russia is already weak from a previous war that they've lost in internal revolution, is unable to support Serbia in this fight, and winds up being humiliated. Okay, so then we went and applied that to having Russia again, the Soviet Union, and the USA being the King of the North, the King of the South, and the fight this time was Iraq. Saddam Hussein has been put in power, is in power, and he wants to unite the Middle East all as one. Correct me if I miss any details. Kuwait is actually stealing, after the battle between Iran and Iraq, they want to, they have debt to pay off. Iraq needs to pay off their debt. They want to get the money that they need to be able to pay off their debt. They find out that they see that Kuwait is actually stealing oil from them by slant drilling, and Iraq then goes in and invades Kuwait, and USA goes to help Kuwait. Is that correct? Are we up to speed?
Yes,
I didn't miss anything? Okay.
that's a great summary. Thank you.
Okay. I do that for myself as much as for anybody else because it helps it sit in your mind a little bit better. So Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait, and then who steps in? The United States comes into that battlefield and they force Iraq out of Kuwait. Now I want to give just a little bit of that history. The United States saw the ambition, just like we had ambitious Serbia, the ambition of Saddam Hussein as a threat, just as Austria-Hungary saw the ambition of Serbia. Both of them were trying to unite the territories around them into one government. So both were trying, Serbia was trying to get all these states to be one government. Iraq was trying to get them all united to be one government. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, it was too powerful, so the United States stepped in and they invaded Kuwait and forced out Iraq. They took Kuwait from Iraq, and they didn't just take it from Iraq. They went and really did a work to destroy the economy of Iraq. If I remember the headlines, they reduced them to, what was the word for it? To not the Stone Age. They reduced them to, maybe somebody remembers the exact words I'm trying to look for. But they took out all of their electric grid and everything so that they were just literally wiped out. But Iraq had a Cold War ally in the Soviet Union. So through this history in 1989 to 1991, the Soviet Union, which originally had been supportive of Saddam Hussein and Iraq, going back through the history of the Cold War, is not able to support Iraq in this Gulf War crisis. So again, they're not able to support Iraq, just like they were not able to support Serbia due to the previous war and the internal revolution. So through this history in 1989, they originally been supportive of Saddam Hussein, and Iraq, going back through this history of the Cold War, is not able to support Iraq in this Gulf War crisis.
It was the pre-industrial age, so bombed back to the pre-industrial age.
Thank you. Thank you. I knew there was a particular thing I was going to do. I remember the electricity being wiped out, so they lost their ability to even have an economy, right? Okay. So instead, Iraq loses Kuwait to the United States. This creates an economic problem. Austria-Hungary had economic leverage over Serbia through the taking of Bosnia. So Austria-Hungary had economic leverage through the taking of Bosnia, because there was economic strength in Bosnia, which caused a problem for Serbia. Serbia wanted to unite everybody. Bosnia had economic strength that Serbia needed. Austria-Hungary takes Bosnia, therefore that economic strength is in with Austria-Hungary here. So you have the same thing with Kuwait. The United States has economic leverage over Iraq through Kuwait. Russia was supposed to support Serbia, but it's too weak because it's lost a war and it's undergoing an internal revolution. So the Soviet Union could not step in and support their ally because they had just lost the Cold War in the history of 1991, and they were also going through internal revolution. So in the history of the Bosnian crisis, we see Serbia line up with Iraq. The conflict over Bosnia line up with Kuwait, Austria-Hungary lining up with the United States, and Russia, too weak and humiliated through this crisis, lining up with the Soviet Union. So you've got Serbia, in the Bosnian crisis, you've got Serbia and Bosnia, you have Austria-Hungary and Russia. And here you have Iraq, you've got the king of the north, the king of the south. Kuwait goes with Iraq. United States takes Kuwait, which is their economic strength. USSR is too weak to be able to defend Iraq, who was their sphere of influence. There was in this history through this conflict, not in Serbia, but within this territory, it's actually out in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there starts to rise up this terrorist organization, and they're known as the Black Hand. The Black Hand begins to rise up as a response from the Slav population against Austria-Hungary. This is a terrorist group. They decided to strike in 1914 and assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Because of this conflict between the Slavs and Austria-Hungary, a terrorist organization comes together, calling themselves the Black Hand, and they assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand in a terrorist attack. This is what is known as the direct or immediate cause of the First World War. Unification of Death, popularly known as the Black Hand, a secret military society formed in 1901 by officers of the Army of the Kingdom of Serbia, best known for being allegedly involved in the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, an earlier conspiracy to assassinate the Serbian royal couple in 1903 under the aegis of Captain Drotin, and I'll skip that last name. It was formed with the aim of uniting all of the territories with a South Slavic majority not ruled by either Serbia or Montenegro. Its inspiration was primarily the unification of Italy in 1859 to 70, but also that of Germany in 1871. Through its connections to June 1914 assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, which was committed by the members of youth movement Young Bosnia. The Black Hand is often viewed as having contributed to the start of World War I by precipitating the July Crisis of 1914, which eventually led to Austria-Hungary's invasion of the Kingdom of Serbia. So you have a terrorist group that forms out of this. And that terrorist group and the rising up of that and the death of Franz Ferdinand is the beginning of World War I. Austria-Hungary then sends an ultimatum to Serbia. It essentially says, if you don't fulfill this really impossible list of demands, we're going to go to war with you. And this list of demands was give up your sovereignty. So Austria-Hungary says to Serbia, let me find my place, I'm trying to watch my, so Austria-Hungary says to Serbia through this ultimatum, you're either going to give up your sovereignty or we're going to invade you. Serbia fulfills most of the requirements in that ultimatum. They're a long way from avoiding war. So much so that even Germany and these other European countries believe that there will be no war. They think that Serbia has done enough to satisfy Austria-Hungary. But Austria-Hungary had wanted a war with Serbia for a long time. They were only looking for an excuse. So they were never going to be satisfied with anything. They were determined to have this war. So they send an ultimatum from Serbia, receives an ultimatum from Austria-Hungary to give up your sovereignty. Despite the fact that Serbia had filled most of the demands of that ultimatum, just short of giving up their sovereignty, it was on July 28, 1914, that the First World War began with Austria-Hungary invading Serbia, and in a matter of days begins a war on two fronts, the Eastern and the Western Front, beginning at the same time. So as soon as Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, you see Russia start mobilizing, Germany starts mobilizing, and then it's all-out war between the East and the West. Germany's fighting a war on two fronts, and we explained that in a previous study. In the First World War, how Germany is here and they're fighting against Russia now, and Russia is going to war because it's humiliated in this history. It couldn't protect Serbia in 1908, and they say we're never going to let that happen again. If Serbia is threatened again, we will defend you. And when Serbia is threatened again, Russia at all costs will protect it. So Germany and Austria-Hungary fighting a war on that front, also fighting against Britain and France. So you have Germany fighting on two fronts, fighting Russia and Serbia and fighting Britain and France. And the war, Austria-Hungary invades Serbia, and you have war on the Eastern and the Western Front begin. So Germany starts coming up with an interesting plan. This war has been dragging on for too long, and they decide that if they're going to win this war, they need to end the war on one of these fronts. They can't keep fighting on both the East and the West. So they decide to end the war on the Eastern Front through strategy. We're going to read some of the history, particularly this is the history of 1917. So there's been internal problems with Russia for quite some time. And we all know of Vladimir Lenin. In the 10 years leading up to 1917, through all of this history, Lenin has been hiding in Switzerland. Lenin is a controversial figure inside Russia. He's not safe there, so he's hiding out inside Switzerland. Everyone knows that he wants to overthrow the Russian government. So what Germany does is they take him from exile in Switzerland and they put him on a sealed train and they send him through Germany, through all the Eastern Front and into Russia. So Germany knowingly planned the Russian Revolution, taking Lenin from Switzerland in a sealed boxcar and sending him by train through to Russia, hoping that he would fulfill what everyone knew he desired in overthrowing the Russian government. And in this history, what is Lenin saying? If I take power, I'll end the war between Russia and Germany. So Germany sends Lenin back to Russia so that Lenin can fulfill his ideas and his desires to overturn the government. And Germany sees that as a way to end war on the Eastern Front. Ludendorff, the famous German general, says Lenin will overthrow the Russian patriots and then I'll strangle him and all his friends. So Ludendorff is saying in sending him, he's going to overthrow the Russian patriots and then I'll just destroy him. There's a telegram in Berlin in a historical museum that was sent through to the German government that read, Lenin has arrived safely in Russia. He's doing just what we wanted him to do. When does Lenin take power? On November 8th, 1917. This ends the war on the Eastern Front. When Lenin takes power on November 8th of 1917, he shortly after fulfills his promise and on March 3rd of 1918 ends that war. This is known as the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. I may not say that right. The ending of the war between Germany and Russia. Germany's plan in that history was successful, but when Lenin signed this treaty, how was the treatment of Russia is within this treaty? How was the treatment of Russia in this treaty? We want to read about Lenin. We want to read what Lenin said about that treaty to go to make peace with Germany because Russia had been losing the war on the Eastern Front leading up to this treaty. Germany had all the leverage where they came to this agreement. According to this treaty, Russia recognized the independence of Ukraine, Georgia, Finland. They gave up Poland, the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, is that right, or is that Lativa? Latvia, Estonia. They ceded Kars out of their hand and gave them to Turkey. The total loss is constituted some 1 million square miles of Russia's former territory. 1/3 of its population, or around 55 million people, a majority of its coal, oil, and iron stores, and much of its industry. Lenin bitterly called the settlement that abyss of defeat, dismemberment, enslavement, and humiliation. So even though this looks like a peace treaty, this was a huge loss to Russia. So much so, they actually lost most of their industry and 1/3 of their population. After this, extending back and through this history, Germany starts to face a problem. They're losing the war on the Western Front. Even though they have peace on the East, that isn't enough for them to win on the West. It's been too long a war, and they're too drained as a country, they can no longer continue. So on November 11th, 1918, known as Armistice Day, Germany finally lays down their weapons and stops the war on the Western Front. So just a quick note, during this time, it was March 3rd, March 4th, at the treaty, March 3rd, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, that the day after that, when the Spanish flu arrived in this history here. Does Germany know it has lost World War I? They actually don't know. Germany in that history had this idealistic idea that it was just a stalemate, that they had lost, but the West had lost just as much. Neither side could continue, so both sides were laying down their weapons and they're going to go to the table and discuss it. So they don't actually realize how much they've lost that war. They don't realize that until 1919 and the Treaty of Versailles. And the West comes to those meetings in Versailles and such a list of demands against Germany, they point Germany back to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and say to Germany, you realize how harsh your treatment was of Russia in this peace treaty. Well, we're going to make it just as hard for you in punishment. So this Treaty of Versailles, because Germany had taken so much from Russia, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is used as an excuse, and the West as the Treaty of Versailles takes so much from Germany, and bitterness over the Treaty of Versailles, how harshly Germany was dealt with, the quantity of reparations they had to repay, the fleets they had to destroy, the weapons they had to give up, all that punishment of the Treaty of Versailles is what gave rise ultimately to the dissatisfaction that led Hitler and World War II, which is why World War I led to World War II, just as the Third Diadochi War led to the Fourth Diadochi War. At the fall of Germany, they don't realize they have lost on Armistice Day. They don't realize that until they're forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. We come to our line and we make applications. We've already made application of the Fourth Diadochi War and World War II. Now we want to make application of the Third Diadochi War and World War I, because we know that World War I plus World War II equals World War III. We must combine them to understand our own time. So we began to do that just with this first waymark, because the complications of the war with Eumenes and the complications of the Bosnian Crisis and the beginning of World War I. So Iraq went through a revolution in 1979 to 1989, and we saw the rise of Saddam Hussein. Iraq wants to unite the Middle East under their sphere of influence. The United States sees that as a threat. Iraq would have power over so much of the global oil supply, the world's lifeblood, and they've come into conflict over Kuwait, which we lined up with the conflict over Bosnia. Everybody following so far?
Yep. Yes.
Everybody's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Iraq's traditional ally was the Soviet Union, as Serbia's was Russia. But their ally is too weak to support them. So in World War I, Russia was too weak to support Serbia, and Russia, Soviet Union, is too weak to support Iraq. We see Iraq in this history weakened to such an extent through this history of the Gulf War. In this history, in 1990, you have George Bush stand up, starting to act like a unilateral power. He's talking about the New World Order, where the United States is in control as a global policeman. He's essentially following the same path as Antigonus. Antigonus was starting to act as a unilateral. He became the master of Asia, a unilateral superpower, and so was George Bush in this history. He gives a speech about what this New World Order is going to look like on September 11th of 1990. He gets up and he gives this famous speech to Congress where he speaks about the world entering into this new phase of the New World Order. He says this in the context of what he's going to do to the Middle East. So some elements within the Middle East, how do they feel about that? Not very favorable to this global policeman. So a terrorist organization begins to form called Al-Qaeda in the Middle East. It's like you have the Black Hand come up. You also then have Al-Qaeda come up. They launched a terrorist attack on 9/11 of 2001. And why did they choose 9/11? It's not proven, but it's widely believed to be a direct response to this unilateral behavior of the United States in the Gulf War. So because of the way the United States was behaving towards the Middle East in 1989 to 91, history, particularly marked with a speech to Congress on 9/11, then time to also make a direct attack on the United States as a superpower is timed to 9/11/2001 by Al-Qaeda. Just as much as you see this Bosnian crisis, its lives within those territories, they see Austria-Hungary is acting as a unilateral power. They form this terrorist organization, and they're going to make a direct attack against it. This is where we see this conflict begin. So they have a terrorist attack after the assassination with the Black Hand in this unity they're trying to bring in to form their government here, that they attack and kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand in a terrorist attack. So let's see here. Correct me if I make any mistakes along the way, because I'm trying to review in my own mind as well as we go. It's widely believed September 11th, 2001 was a direct attack on the United States unilateralism, particularly in its interference within the Middle East. So in 2001, you have this terrorist attack, and who does the United States blame for it? They blame Iraq. And the United States sends an ultimatum to Iraq. It has quite a few things on their list of demands, but one of the key demands that they gave in that final ultimatum to Saddam Hussein was that Saddam Hussein had to step down from power and leave the country. He's telling him to give up his sovereignty to the United States. So you've got this terrorist organization that is formed during this crisis. You've got this terrorist organization that is formed in this crisis. You've got George Bush giving his speech on the New World Order on September 11th of 1990, and the Al-Qaeda is formed, and then there's a terrorist attack on 9/11. Then the United States gives an ultimatum to Iraq to give up their sovereignty, just as Serbia is given an ultimatum from Austria-Hungary to give up their sovereignty. Iraq has fulfilled most of its expectations from this history, so much so that the world, the UN, thought that the war was averted, just like you saw here. They thought that the war would be averted. They didn't think that the United States would invade, which brings us up to the history of the Third Diadochi War. There's other people that are also starting to tell the United States, hey, you're starting to act like a global dictator. Those other three in the history of the Third Diadochi War, it's Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander. So using this, you have these three allies that are saying, hey, we need to watch out because Antigonus is becoming a dictator. Now you have territories here that are saying that the United States is becoming to act like a dictator.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Sorry. So that is the UN, right? Because that is the UN. Those three, do they represent the UN?
No.
Because
We're going to read it right now. We're going to read right now who it is. In this history, you also have three allies stand up to the United States. And the UN is involved, but these are the three territories. That is France, Germany, and Russia. They also send an ultimatum to the United States, and they tell the United States, they told George Bush, if you try to go to war with Iraq, we're going to block you through the UN Security Council. We're going to use our veto powers to prevent you from invading Iraq. Did that help? So connecting the history of the Third Diadochi War, we have the Battle of Gabini. Antigonus is rising as a dictator. He kills his original ally, Python, and now the United States has fought with the Mujahideen in this history, and the Mujahideen begin to rise to power. You have Python begin to rise to power that is seen as a threat. The Mujahideen become the Taliban in 1996 and take over Afghanistan. It was not the Taliban that took down the Twin Towers in 9/11. So the Mujahideen, whoever brought that up earlier, develops into the Taliban.
Sister Lane, hold on. Before you go to the next slide. So yeah, the Mujahideen, they become the Taliban, but it says that it was not the Taliban that took down the Twin Towers on 9/11.
Right.
Who was that? Who did that?
Al-Qaeda.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
In fact, if you went to Afghanistan today, they sent journalists in, and as they wander around the villages in Afghanistan and ask them what they know about 9/11, and many of the people have never even heard of it. The Taliban did not take part in this terrorist attack, but the United States knew that Al-Qaeda was hiding out within Afghanistan. So they used that as an excuse, a terrible excuse that's led to 18 years of a fruitless war in Afghanistan. At the same time, you see Antigonus take down his former ally, he kills Python. So the United States went into Afghanistan and they took down the Taliban, their former ally in the previous Afghanistan war. Afghanistan isn't enough. They also want to invade Iraq. We see this ultimatum. There's 2 ultimatums in our history. 3 allies against the King of the North, France, Germany, Russia, saying stop acting like a dictator and start sharing. We're in the UN, and remember that. You have another ultimatum from the King of the North to its small country saying, give up your sovereignty to us. You had the United States say to Saddam Hussein, give up your sovereignty to us, step back from power. When they fail to fulfill this clause, the giving up of their sovereignty, you have an invasion of Serbia and you have an invasion of Iraq. So they tell them to give up their sovereignty, and then you have an invasion of Iraq, just like you had Austria-Hungary invade Serbia. And Austria-Hungary wanted war with Serbia. So when Serbia had done most everything that they were required, people thought that we had averted war. But the United States, like Austria-Hungary, had always wanted war with Iraq. So they invade Iraq. This war with Iraq then begins, based on this application? We see the ultimatum and then the Iraq war. So what begins at the Iraq war? You have war on the Eastern Front. 2003, you have war on the Eastern Front. Plus the Western Front beginning at the same point in time. So the Eastern Front of World War I in application begins with the Iraq War in 2003. It was Russia in this history that was supposed to support Iraq in the UN through France and Germany. But Russia, back in the history of the Gulf War, had not been able to support Saddam Hussein. Vladimir Putin does not want to see that happen again. He's been in power for about 3 to 4 years now, and he's wanting to establish Russia, not yet really as this feared superpower. All he's saying to the United States is stop acting like a unilateral dictator.
I just find that so interesting that it's Russia who's also telling the United States to stop acting like a dictator.
I know.
Kind of funny.
When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, this is known historically as the catalyst that turns Vladimir Putin so vehemently against the United States. Later on, even down into our history, when people attack him for invading Ukraine, what does he say? I invaded Ukraine, you invaded Iraq. Not quite so clearly because he claims not to be in Ukraine. But in his own twisted fashion, that's the message he sends back. I can do what I want in Ukraine. Look what you did to Iraq illegally. Because it was an illegal invasion, they went against the direction of the UN. So with the invasion of Iraq begins war on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Gaza is also known as the Battle of Rafah. It's not the Battle of Rafah from Daniel 11, but Gaza and Rafah are interchangeable. This location of Gaza was also known as Rafah. So this Battle of Gaza, fought between Demetrius and Ptolemy, is also called in history the Battle of Rafah. So we line that up with the Battle of Rafah. What do we recognize about World War II? Who wins World War II?
The King of the South.
King of the South.
Yeah.
I'm trying to follow it along too. So you've got the Battle of Gaza where Demetrius is defeated. I'm trying to understand, and maybe Adriana has it, because it was the question that I think Sister Victoria had, is you have Ptolemy here. So this is Russia here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Russia wins. Because World War II, Russia won because Hitler lost.
Okay.
But it's a little confusing because Russia was allied with the United States, so it seems to, but it was Russia. If it's between that king on North and South, it was Russia that won.
Can I ask a question too?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm trying to not sound so loud. So hopefully I don't sound so loud.
You're fine.
But in that your prior slide, where it's talking about Gaza and Rafah, Elder Tess in recent video says that they're two different wars, right?
Yes.
Or like that. You understand that, Sister Elaine, when she says that?
The Battle of Gaza and the Battle of Rafah are two different wars. Yes.
Right, I get that. But there was a point that she was making when she said that. I can't remember the point when she was explaining that they're not the she was saying something. I can't remember the point that she wanted to bring out. Like when she was saying that these two are not the same thing.
Right. So what I understood about that presentation was that the Rafah that we know of 2019, that's a battle between Ptolemy and Seleucus. So that's the battle that we know. Now the Battle of Gaza, the reason that it's also referred to as Battle of Rafah, it's because the Gaza is in the region of Rafah. So that's another battle. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's not the Battle of Ptolemy and Seleucus. It's the Battle of Demetrius against Egypt, correct?
Yeah.
Right. But that Gaza is in the reason it's also known as Rafah. It's because the Gaza is in the region of Rafah, but it's not the same Rafah as we know.
Because the Battle of Gaza and the Battle of Rafah were two different battles.
Right, they're two different battles.
But her point was that one happened way before the other happened, but Gaza was in the region of Rafah. That's why we know that we can put Gaza at the same waymark as we put Rafah.
Even though they're two different battles.
Exactly, right, because they're two different lines.
Right.
Because the time frame, the time frame here is the Third Diadochi War. And that's during the successor wars, and the time frame of the Battle of Rafah that we know is well after, between the King of the North and the King of the South. Correct? It's well after the Diadochi Wars.
Yeah, the Gaza
Yes.
is between verse 4 and 5, and then the actual Battle of Rafah is verse 13, 15.
Yeah.
Thank you. I will have to hear this video again, but yeah, thank you. That was helpful.
So when we make application, who wins? What do we do to World War II when we make application? We have to switch them. And we discussed that before, how the alpha history is failure and the omega history is success. World War I and World War II are the alpha history of the war between the King of the North and the King of the South. And we can demonstrate that through the counterfeit as well as through the world wars. So if this is the alpha history, then what do we switch? We switch our victor, the victor and the loser in that war. As we begin to switch this war from 2003 forward, instead of it being Germany or the King of the North that employs this tactic, it's going to be the King of the South. So Germany, they took Lenin and said, we will send you through to Russia because you're going to overthrow the government and make peace with us. So in this history from 2003, Vladimir Putin comes up with a plan. The best way to make peace with the United States is to overthrow the government. So he finds someone, he finds Donald Trump. We've already lined up their pact or alliance, or it's known as collusion. Just like Germany sent Lenin into Russia, so Russia sent Donald Trump into the United States. And this was November 8th of 1917. And when did Donald Trump win his election? November 8th of 2016. What has he succeeded to do? He's made peace on the Eastern Front. And this is one of the points from this study that we need to come back and discuss later. How do we see this year? How do we see the Battle of Raphia? Because in the history of World War II and most of our other histories, we see it as this war between two enemies. What World War I brings to the table is these two are enemies and now they're friends. Donald Trump doesn't start the war, now he ends the war. And he ends the war at the Battle of Raphia in 2019. But this work came at a great loss to Russia. So this peace comes at a great loss to the United States. It came at a great loss to the King of the South in the Alpha history, and it comes as a great loss to the King of the North in the Omega history. It was more than a peace. But then, what do we know? What do we know what's going to happen? Germany is fighting a battle on the Western Front and has internal problems. It begins to lose because of those problems. So as Germany cannot continue to fight, it's too weak leading up to this late history of 1989. So we know that coming up to Panium, we see the fall of the King of the South. We see that in this history of Antigonus, he marches back down, takes all that territory up to the borders of Egypt itself. And then we're here. And we go all the way up to the borders of Russia at Panium. So we know these spheres of influence that they've been fighting over will slip out of the hand of the King of the South. And all of that territory taken over by the King of the North up until the borders of Russia itself. In the history of 1989 to 91, the United States took all of the satellite states to the borders of Russia itself. So when we find that repeated in this history from Panium to Sunday Law, we see Russia lose all of its territories through to the borders of Russia itself. Now, is Russia itself as a country going to be destroyed? No. What does it need to happen to die as the King of the South? All it has to lose is its spheres of influence. So from Panium and then to Sunday Law, we see it lose its spheres of influence. Russia itself does not have to be destroyed. That's all that's needed to weaken it to such a state that prophecy identifies it as dead, as that symbol.
Can I say something?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we know that history from Panium to the Sunday Law, is that am I saying this right? That portion is like the Cold War, right? Or maybe I'm getting mixed up in my history. But the point that I'm saying is that the spheres of influence, it's like the gradual death of Russia.
Right, because you had on the other line that we looked at in the beginning that had the Cold War in there, you had leading up to 1989 to 91 where they lost all their spheres of influence. that you have that. So you had this ongoing war. You have this ongoing war that began in 2003. This war on the Eastern Front. They send in Donald Trump to try to destroy the government of the United States. But you have it Panium, where Russia is going to then lose all of its spheres of influence because it's too weak to support its allies.
Yeah, and the way I was looking at it, I don't know if this is how it's going to be, but you know, you have, is it like one at a time, just one, like 1, 2, 3, like a gradual type thing?
You have to go
Like,
back and look at 1989 to 1991, but I think it was a gradual thing. It became a domino effect. Maybe Sister Adriana or Sister Christina has better understanding on that, but I think it became like a domino effect.
It was pretty quick when Poland and that group in Poland that I keep always forgetting their name, when they rebelled against the USSR, then it was a chain reaction. All the satellite states on the border of Russia just had enough, and it was gradual, but it was quick.
Solidarity.
Yes.
And that was the work that was done by John Paul II, right?
I'm still not sure what connection that was. I thought that was the United States.
Okay.
But maybe it was John Paul II, I don't know.
Because he went into Poland. He was from Poland, he went into Poland. He had to do with that group, Solidarity, that you're talking about. But I don't have enough of those details handy either.
I know after the revolution, he went there and they hated him.
Afterwards, yeah. Before they loved him, if I remember right. That might be in this study. I can't remember because I know I just went through that history. In the history of Panium to Sunday law, we also see another lesson we can learn, this time from the Third Diadochi War. And this is Panium here to the Sunday law. This would be Panium, this would be Sunday law. Here we find lining up with Panium, there's this peace treaty. This peace made, we find between Ptolemy and Antigonus, king of the north and king of the south. That becomes resolved, and we also mark the Nabateans. So we add Islam to the waymark, Panium. The Nabateans are another event at Panium. So you add Islam here. You have the Nabateans, which descend from Ishmael, which puts Islam here at this waymark as well. Then, because of this Battle of Gaza, in the conflict between the North and the South, who begins to rise and establish themselves? This is where you have Seleucus rising. You have the rise of Seleucus until the Seleucid dynasty is fully set up. And the Seleucid dynasty, the king operational at the Sunday law, the Seleucid dynasty, the king of the North in this history is bringing it back to here in this alliance with the Mujahideen and the papacy. The papacy being marked as Seleucus. So if we see Seleucus, he goes to this history. Seleucus goes from being an ally of the king of the North, back in here, the Mujahideen, or Seleucus being an ally of Antigonus, king of the North of the United States, to dissolving of that alliance, to finally fighting for his place at the Sunday law. And we describe Seleucus as the papacy, and this will be reviewed and finalized in another study. So somebody help me out with what I was just reading here. So the Mujahideen, this is actually dissolved here, right? Between the Mujahideen becomes Taliban, and their relationship is dissolved. But it's from this that they wind up coming back, just like you have Seleucus who comes back. Is that correct? But Seleucus is the papacy.
Can you say that again, Sister?
No, because I'm not sure I had it right. So I don't know that I could say it again. I'm trying to fit the maybe we'll just read this section again. And if anybody has
well, because the Mujahideen, and sorry, I'm just gonna butcher that word, but anyways, and the papacy, they were the two
allies.
Yeah, the two allies. And we know that the papacy didn't fight in the war. That was the Mujahideen. And the papacy, they fought, I mean, they didn't fight in battle, but they fought in the courts or something like that. They fought in a different way, but it wasn't in battle. right?
Seleucus in this battle fought behind the scenes by helping
Right,
support
yes,
food and that type of stuff. Yeah.
right. And that was what the papacy did too. Because the papacy did help in taking down the USSR, even though it was internal. They were allies in that, weren't they? They were allies in that, because
Well,
you have
and that's where John Paul II went to Poland.
yes,
That was brought up, where John Paul II went to Poland.
yeah,
So he was working through Poland, and I believe he's connected to, if anybody wants to look it up, to the Solidarity Movement. Is that what it's called? And then the Mujahideen, they were both allies to the United States in the bringing down of the Soviet Union. So, but what I was trying to grasp is, I get how you bring Islam from here to here, but there was a piece of it that I missed. The papacy, let's see. So back up. You have the rise of the Seleucids until the Seleucid dynasty is fully established and operational at the Sunday Law. And the Seleucid dynasty, the king of the north in this history, is bringing it back to here in this in alliance with the Mujahideen and the papacy. Okay, so it's this rise of the Seleucid dynasty at the Sunday Law, fully operational at the Sunday Law, bringing it back to this here, this alliance here that you have the Mujahideen and the papacy. The papacy being marked as Seleucus. So if we see Seleucus, he goes to this history. Seleucus goes from being an ally of the King of the North of the United States to the dissolving of that alliance, to finally fighting for his place at the Sunday Law. This is Seleucus fighting for his place at the Sunday Law. And we describe Seleucus as the papacy. And this will be reviewed and finalized in another study. But we do place Islam here as the Nabateans are here at this piece of the Dynas. So that's the part that I still want to figure out. And we have, if anybody wants to do it, I just went to this instead of the Islam study, but Brother Itabo in Europe, or in Africa, he sent me all his notes. If anybody wants to review those notes and work on possibly doing that presentation, let me know. I think I've sent those notes out before, but if somebody wants to try to look at that, because that helps us to understand the line of Islam in here as well. Okay, so now we're going to jump. That was the end of that study, and I put in the last 20 minutes or so of the Portugal study that she does on COVID-19, because basically what she does in that study is the review of what we just went through. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, real quick. So going back to what you were talking about with Islam, because we know Islam helps us to do our work, right? Like,
they are as a restraint for us to do our work. That's what he shows. That's what he shows in, and it's been a while since I watched those presentations, but that's what he shows is the work of Islam and how it's always a restraint for God's people to go forward. It was during the Reformation, and it was a restraint during the Millerite movement, and it will be a restraint for us.
Right, and that's what I understood. And then, but then it's interesting that you have Islam and you have the papacy both coming back at that time. So it's really interesting because they put a kind of what is it? I'm probably not going to say this right, but they kind of put a whole, never mind, because I'm probably not saying it right. But it's interesting the role of Islam in helping us, but then they're also they're not partner with Seleucus, right? Or with the papacy, right?
No.
Right.
And
yeah, they're just doing their own thing.
And the quote, hold, right? Until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads.
Yeah.
Right? And let me find one other one that we all know. Hang on one second. In Revelation 7, after these things I saw the four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. So this is a sealing time that is going on, and there's 3 groups there that they're told not to hurt. We know that from Revelation 9 that they were not to hurt God's true people as well. So so Islam acts as a restraint. The activities of Islam act as a restraint for the sealing time to go on. And then when you go to Revelation 18, if I understand it correctly, that's when they're let loose. And then you have the destruction in Revelation 18 after the sealing time. If anybody has any thoughts on that, did I say that incorrectly?
That sounded right, Sister Elaine.
Okay.
Okay.
So then this is the, like I said, the last 20 minutes of this particular video. I just thought that it would be good after watching that presentation that most of it is just, she just goes through the applications, not so much the history, but the applications of what we just actually went through. And then she comes to the end and she makes the application of the COVID-19. Okay, so a little bit of review. In application, we have the Bosnian Crisis that explains the Gulf War, the interaction between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, the interaction between the US and Iraq. Russia was too weak to defend Serbia because it's been experiencing internal revolutions. Russia's too weak to defend Iraq. The Soviet Union experiencing internal revolution. Out of the Slavic states developed this terrorist organization, that was the Black Hand, and out of those Eastern countries develops Al-Qaeda. So you have the Black Hand developed here, and you have Al-Qaeda developed here. The terrorist organization strikes, and they kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Let's see, and Austria-Hungary sends ultimatum to Serbia. The ultimatum is sent to Serbia, give up your sovereignty. United States sends an ultimatum to Iraq, to Saddam Hussein, give up your sovereignty. Most were fulfilled, but sovereignty was not handed over. Austria-Hungary invaded Serbia, and the United States invaded Iraq in 2003. And here began a much bigger war. So this begins here, a much bigger war. We know that's a war in the Eastern Front, begins a much bigger war. So also in 2003, there was an information war. So we know that this is information war that began to play out. This was an information war between the United States. We know that that can go back to the information, we can trace it all the way back to the information age. That began to play out. This was an information war between the United States and Russia. This is the Eastern Front of World War I. So we have the Eastern Front of World War, that should say one. That should say one right here. This information war begins the Eastern Front of World War I. So in 2003 begins World War III. World War I, the Eastern Front extends from 2003 to 2019. So it goes from 2003 to 2019. Germany is going to end that Eastern Front by changing the government of Russia. He overthrows the government on November 8th. Trump is declared the winner on November 9th, but that election to vote was November 8th, and that's when he wins. On November 8th, he wins. On November 8th, this was, the overthrowing of the government and Lenin, right? This was Lenin.
Yeah. Well, that puts it, I don't know, it just clicked in my brain because you know that when we were talking about the World War III and when that was going to happen, we're living in that war, you know, because everyone kind of would project that. That was that whole controversy about when World War III would start, and people were projecting that in the future, and we were actually
in it.
Yeah, that's like, whoa.
We're in it.
Yeah, just clean. Yeah. Wow.
Information.
Yeah, and I knew that, but it's just really quick.
I know.
Yeah.
And this was from, go ahead.
The introduction of, I think I might have asked this question somewhere before, the introduction of Lenin into Russia is paralleling the introduction of Trump into the United States, right? Into the
but that was actually just what I was just going to say, yeah, because they put Lenin on the Germany wanted to end war on the Eastern Front. They knew how to do that. That was, they took Lenin, who always wanted to overthrow the government of Russia. So they take him, who's hiding out in Switzerland, and put him on a train and send him back to Russia. and that winds up ending the war on and overturns and to end the war. So here you have Putin that actually sends Donald Trump in here as well. So they're allies here at this point here, and he sends Donald Trump in here to overthrow the government.
So the reason why we can take Lenin, who goes into Russia, from that line and say that it's Trump into the United States in our line is because it's an alpha and omega line. So you're actually getting the reverse. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
That's very cool. Actually, yeah, that makes sense.
We're a few minutes off over time.
Oh, so we'll pause on this one.
Yeah.
This doesn't have that much more to go, but we'll carry it in. But I may not have more. I'll be out of material or start something and not be able to finish. So pause here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 33. That's good. We'll just kind of back up and review again. We'll spend time reviewing. So
it's Tony next, right?
Yeah, it's Tony next.
Okay.
So who wants to? Oh, so this is lunch break, right? No. Okay.
Tony's next, then lunch break. Then
I lose track of time when we do it this way. Okay, so who wants to close in prayer? Let's see. Sister Susan, are you able to talk? You might not be able to talk. Sister Christine?
Before we leave off in prayer, Sister Susan had she had written something, kind of a long thing, at around the 12:13 mark that might be good to read. I guess I'll just read it now. She just requests, will it be possible to open just a little time to discuss some of the aspects of Sunday law and how it is playing out in our time so that we can all hammer out our understandings from these wonderful studies? It would be beneficial for us to be able to practically explain it to others we are interacting with right now. It would also be beneficial for us as a group to gain unity in our understanding. I do not want to be holding on to any wrong understandings. If not today, then maybe we can schedule something in our other meeting day schedules in the near future. I don't know if somebody already read that, but I thought that was needed to be read.
I think that either I don't understand it all myself yet, or it's not all clearly explained yet.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't understand it all clearly either, so it would be kind of difficult to explain it anyway.
And I think because also you have where in this dispensation, just like when back in the previous dispensation, there were those that were pointing to 2021 before we even got to November 9. So more and more light will open up in that next dispensation on increase of knowledge and formalization of the message.
I think what she's referring to, though, is discussing what we know now so that we can hammer it out, because there's a lot of things that are in the studies that we can hear it over and over again, but until we discuss it, we don't really have a good understanding when we're actually communicating with one another. Like I feel the same way. I only gain so much from listening to the studies, but when I'm talking to you guys, when there's the little breaks of conversation, that's where I get most of my bread from. Because I already have all this stuff in my head, but I need to hear what's coming from you guys, your guys' perspective. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be broken into these studies here the way you're doing them, but I think what she's asking is there possibly we can open up another time if interested in doing that.
Well, it would take somebody wanting to take on that task.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll put it out there. Somebody can take that task on.
If you guys, I don't know if you want to do that or not, Elaine, but you did say we might have time, and you know what I'm saying? Because you're going to finish yours early?
Yeah, at the end of mine, yeah.
Yeah, I believe if we have time, it would be awesome.
Yeah, we will. So the last one, because Tony's going to go next, and then
mine's short.
After lunch, we're going to finish up the COVID-19, which is only going to be maybe 20 minutes. So, yeah. So keep that in mind, because we don't all have answers. So to open up the discussion, we need to know which direction we're going. So
we'll have basics.
So that's open. And then I don't have to bring out that other study and I can save that for another time. About when does the third angel arrive?
We need to make sure Susan can make that, because that's what she wanted.
Susan, can you make this afternoon study?
Is she on right now? I don't think I see her.
Yeah, I'm here. My mom's sleeping. I just woke her up when I talked out loud. What time? I plan to try and be with you till 4:30.
Okay. So it'll be in that time slot between like 3 and 4:30.
3, and yeah, that's exactly meeting 5. So that'll be the perfect time.
Okay. So Sister Christine or Sister Susan, if you want to, then somebody do the prayer. Close us in prayer and we'll take a 15-minute break.
Okay, let me walk to another room because Mama's got the TV on. Hold on a sec. You can probably hear that in the background. They're doing a William Miller history on 3ABN. Okay. All right. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, dear Heavenly Father, it's so wonderful, Lord, to reach a Sabbath. It's so wonderful to get to be able to come together with the brethren and sisters, Lord. Thank you for providing this outlet for us, Lord, and laying it in place long before this COVID-19 crisis, Lord. Thank you for these studies. I wish that I could hold these details in my head better. Maybe others have that same feeling, Lord. There's so much information, and we're thankful for the information, but we need greater capacity to hold on and understand these things as you want us to understand them, so we can express them to others, Lord, in a practical way when interacting and sharing, Lord. Many people have so many questions right now, and we see that you're preparing their hearts to receive this message, and we just want to be able servants, Lord, to glorify thee. Thank you for the work that's gone into preparing these lessons today, Lord, the slides, the time that Sister Elaine put in to the slides, the graphs and charts, Lord. Thank you for the other input that others have put in, Lord, to help us understand. Thank you for the maps, and just really appreciate everything you're doing, Lord. Please be with each dear soul here, Lord, in a special way. Keep us calm, keep us at peace in our homes. Keep your presence around us, Lord, so that we feel and know you're with us. And thank you. I just can't say thank you enough. And as we go on break, Lord, continue to keep our thoughts high in heaven, and please bring us all back together and keep our homes quiet and peaceful so we can enjoy the rest of the Sabbath together. And any unrequested requests in people's hearts here, Lord, you know them, you've marked them, and we know that you are working these things out for each of us. Thank you for hearing this prayer. I pray in your precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.